Hi, it's Dwyer, gamblersadvisory.com. Here to talk about a fight that fascinates me. It's the super middleweight championship fight that's taking place in Canada between Lucian Bute, who will be fighting in his adopted home country. Right? He's originally from Romania. He is one of the sport's best boxers. And he's fighting European super middleweight champion Brian MaGee. Now, the casinos have Lucian Bute as a 12 to 1 and higher favorite. Let's talk about this fight. Before I do, just consider this video to be a second opinion from a complete stranger online. The opinion you should follow should be your own. Let me just say, I know Bute, a fighter I admire. You can see my earlier videos on Bute by simply doing a search for gamblersadvisory.com, Lucian Bute. You'll see I've taken Bute in many fights. He's a fighter I admire. Very advanced skills. But this fight really gets into my philosophy on gambling. You know, as I've always said, I'm not here to pick winners. I'm actually here to make money, and all I'm saying is this line is absurd, right? This is as ridiculous a line as any fight in which you have a very cagey, very experienced, still in shape opponent who, quite frankly, is vastly underrated. I believe more appropriate odds for this fight, rather than having Bute at 12 to 1, which means that Bute would win 12 out of 13 matches between these two. I believe a more realistic risk assessment of this fight would have Bute as no more than a 2 to 1 favorite. Let me also point out, too, just imagine what the odds would be if Lucian Bute were to fight Carl Froch, right? Well, my point to you is that there is not a fighter on the planet who gave Carl Froch a rougher fight than Brian MaGee. The video is actually up on YouTube. By the way, that fight is the only fight in which MaGee was knocked out. It was one of Froch's best moments, but understand, the knockout came in the 11th round. The fight was still up for grabs all the way up until the knockout. Understand, too, that two of the judges, and Froch was unbeaten at the time, two of the judges at the moment of the stoppage had Carl Froch ahead by only one round. And I'm telling you, the 11th round itself was up for grabs. That fight easily could have flipped the other way. That's the talent level of Brian MaGee. Also, Carl Froch is not the only tough fighter Brian MaGee has faced. Obviously, since he's the European super middleweight champion, the guy has been, and he's defended that title, the guy has been in championship fights in Europe. But understand, he also fought Robin Reed, a guy with very heavy hands, and he went 12 rounds with Robin Reed, right? When you're dealing with a savvy vet who knows his way around the ring and who has boxing ability, that vet should never be a 12 to 1 underdog. Let's talk about the logistics of the fight. The bet I'm recommending, and it'll shock some people here, my betting philosophy is if the casino is going to give you leverage, and if you know a guy who has the leverage is underrated, then you need to take it, right? The bet I'm recommending here, and I'm not saying he wins the fight. In fact, I think Bute probably wins a spirited fight that's going to go several rounds, The bet I'm recommending here is that you take Brian MaGee. You're going to get at least 6-1 odds, and that's simply absurd, right? It's only because MaGee is not known in the United States that the line is this ridiculous. Take Brian MaGee to win the fight at 6-1 odds. Then what I want you to do is to tease down the over-under. And by that I mean the over-under I've seen is anywhere from 9.5 to 10.5 rounds. What I want you to do is to tease that down to 9 rounds. And the way you would do that would simply be to buy rounds. You can take the over, right? Let's say it's 10. We'll split the 9.5, 10.5 difference. Let's say you can get 10 if you shop around. I would take the over. Then you can literally take both guys to win in the 9th round. You'll get spectacular odds. Typically, those bets will be 40-1 odds and 30-1 odds. Just take both guys to win in the 9th round. This way, you'll have the fight 9 and over, right? That's the other side of the bet. In other words, I believe you need to have MaGee to win, straddled against an over 9 rounds, right? And you might have to buy a round or two to get that on the other side of the equation. What I don't see is Lucian Bute, even in Canada, knocking out a fighter as advanced as Brian MaGee in the first 8 rounds of this fight. Brian MaGee is qualitatively, in my opinion, a better fighter than Edison Miranda, who Bute stopped, and Libredo Andrade, who, people may remember, gave Bute his toughest test to date. Let me also backtrack a little bit, address the Carl Froch fight. Let me just say this. I understand that Carl Froch has had tough moments in the ring, right? He was down against Jermaine Taylor. He had to come back and win that fight by knockout in something like the last minute of that fight. I understand he lost to Mikkel Kessler in Denmark, his one official loss, and quite frankly, on my scorecard, he lost to Andre Durrell. But I'll say this. Even in the Taylor fight, Carl Froch had more stamina than his opponent in the last round, right? In the Kessler fight, Carl Froch had more stamina than Kessler in the last round of that fight. And let me also say this, too, in the Kessler fight. While Kessler got the nod, I would argue that the scoring was a little bit curious in that fight. I thought that fight was much closer than the judges had it. Well, compare and contrast that with Carl Froch in the 10th and 11th rounds against Brian MaGee. You're going to find that Carl Froch was completely winded. Carl Froch knew he was in the fight of his life. He goes to his corner knows he's in the fight of his life. Such as Brian MaGee. Let me also point out, too, MaGee holds his hands high, right? Very good defensive fighter. The way he protects his body is by fooling around with distance. In other words, he's not close enough to you to get hit with body shots, right? He's moving around the ring. But of course, MaGee can also flip the switch and fight inside. He's actually a very good inside fighter. He went to Denmark and actually fought a guy, Mads Larsen, and he literally just flipped the switch, came inside, fought Ricky Hatton style, and made that fight an absolute mess for Larsden in his backyard, right? Well, my point to you is this. Bute is tall for a super middleweight. Brian MaGee is 6 feet tall. Bute is a southpaw. A lot of people have problems with that. Brian MaGee is a southpaw. I understand MaGee is in his mid-30s. I'll just say this. In boxing, don't judge guys by the press clippings. Actually look at the fights and judge guys by what they do in the ring, right? You have some very good fighters who, for whatever reason, just aren't that well known by the public. The only difference between Dmitry Pirog before he beat Danny Jacobs and Dmitry Pirog after he beat Danny Jacobs was the publicity he received. He was the same guy. We're all amazed now with Sergio Martinez, who's widely viewed as, on the very short list with probably Floyd, Nonito Donaire, Manny Pacquiao as the best fighter pound for pound. But yet, Sergio Martinez is in his mid-30s. Many people didn't know who Sergio Martinez was in his early 30s. And when you look at Martinez's record, you're going to see he was a great fighter. My point to you with Brian MaGee is I know he's not known. I'm not saying he wins this fight. But give me a break. This guy is dangerous. And when you see a dangerous guy at, as a 6-1 and higher underdog, you've got to get a taste of that leverage. Let me say, too, Bute, the way he fights, he exhausts himself, right? Take a look at Bute in the 12th round of his first fight against Libredo Andrade. In fact, take a look at Bute in the latter rounds of his fight against Sakio Bika, right? Bute is an excellent fighter, but he moves so much. And he's throwing jabs and doing so much in the ring that he gets tired late in fights. This is very different than, let's say, guys like Manny Pacquiao, Carl Froch, Bernard Hopkins. They don't get as tired as Bute gets. Now, my point to you is this. When I see Carl Froch dead tired against Brian MaGee, when I'm looking at Brian MaGee fights and I'm seeing his opponent always dead tired late in fights, that tells me that MaGee is doing something to deplete his opponents. All I'm saying is, if this fight gets into the later rounds and Bute starts to get tired, anything can happen in this fight. So I think it's a dangerous fight. I think Bute should be a 2-1 favorite, not a 12-1 favorite. My recommended play here, I expect this fight to go a few rounds. It seems to be a recent theme in boxing, right? Canelo was supposed to destroy Matthew Hatton. I told people Hatton is a survivor. Hatton ends up going 12 rounds with Canelo. Ricardo Mayorga was viewed as over the hill against Miguel Cotto. I thought that fight was much closer than the casino. Ricardo Mayorga makes it into the 12th round before getting stopped. All I'm saying is think of this fight like those. I think the people on Showtime are going to be amazed at how competitive this fight is early on. The way I'm structuring the bet is to take Brian MaGee to win the fight straddled against the over. I'm expecting Lucian Bute to either win this fight by decision or perhaps by very late stoppage, but I'm not expecting him to be able to end this fight before the 9th round. Let me know what you think. Leave your comments for me here on YouTube. Visit us at gamblersadvisory.com. All I ask is that win, lose, or draw after the fight, come back, leave comments for me on my YouTube homepage. Trust me when I say that during the fight, don't be surprised if people are scoring the fight on my YouTube homepage. It's a great way to connect with other boxing fans and to find out what they're thinking as the action is taking place. My YouTube homepage is youtube.com/DWYER70905. Thanks for watching.